I never could have imagined that my simple habit of buying lottery tickets would lead to such consequences. I've been buying 3 scratch-off tickets every Saturday morning for the last 12 years. Always 3. Never 2, never 4. I don't know why exactly, maybe because Frank used to say 3 was a lucky number, or maybe because 3 gives you just enough hope without getting foolish. I tuck my purse under my arm, pull on my soft gray cardigan, and walk the 4 blocks down to Marco's Market on the corner of East 5th. Marco's a stocky man with a grin you can see even under that big mustache of his. He's been calling me Miss Clara since the first week I stepped in there, long after most folks switched to just ma'am, or worse yet, didn't notice me at all. The bell above his door still jingles when you open it, though it leans to one side now, and the place smells faintly of oranges and coffee. Every week I hand over $15, cash, always cash, and Marco fans the tickets out in front of me like he's dealing cards in a high-stakes game. "Your usual, Miss Clara?" he'll ask, and I'll nod. He knows which ones I like. The Buckeye Bonanza, with the gold lettering and the promise of riches tucked under a layer of silver dust. It's never been about winning. Not really. It's about the what if. What if just once the numbers lined up and the world opened a little wider? For those few minutes before I scratch them, I get to imagine a better kitchen, a trip to Lake Erie, maybe even fixing the leaky roof. Then I tuck them into the pocket of my cardigan and walk home with a paper bag of milk, a loaf of rye bread, and my little stack of maybes. That Saturday was no different at first. The air had that late spring softness to it, and the sidewalk was damp from the morning's drizzle. Marco handed me the tickets with his usual wink. "Go get 'em, Miss Clara," he said, and I laughed, slipping them between the pages of the church bulletin I'd picked up from the stand by the door. At home I put the kettle on, set the bread on the counter, and laid the tickets on the table. Normally, I'd scratch them right away, while the tea steeped before the day's noise set in. But something in me hesitated. I looked at the neat little row of them, their edges curling just slightly, and thought, not yet. Maybe I wanted to savor the possibility a little longer. I scratched one halfway, just the top row, and set it aside. No match yet. The second one I left untouched, the silver surface unbroken. The third, well, I don't quite know why, but I turned it over in my hand, studying the print on the back. My name wasn't there yet. I'd always sign them after scratching, but that morning I thought of something Frank used to say. If you don't write your name on what's yours, someone else will. Still, I set it aside with the others. There was laundry to be folded, and I'd promised myself I'd sweep the porch before the afternoon sun hit it. The tickets waited quietly on the kitchen table, 3 little rectangles of hope, while I went about my day. I didn't know then, couldn't have known, that one of those tickets held $22 million under its silver skin. And I didn't know, not yet, that before the week was out, those tickets would tear my family apart. But I felt something. A small, almost imperceptible hum in the air. Like the pause before a summer storm, or the moment between drawing a breath and speaking a truth that can't be unsaid. And so, for the first time in years, I didn't rush to find out whether I'd won. I let the what if linger sweet and heavy, just a little while longer. The morning it happened, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and the rye bread I'd sliced thick for toast. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, catching on the steam curling up from my mug. I was at the table, pencil in hand, working the crossword from yesterday's paper when I heard Leo's footsteps. Heavy, quick, the way he walked when he was already angry about something. Before I could greet him, his shadow fell across the table. "For God's sake, Mom," he barked, holding something between his thumb and forefinger like it was a dead mouse. "What is this garbage?" I blinked up at him. "It's a scratch-off, Leo. My tickets." His lip curled and my boy, my only boy, looked at me as if I just confessed to stealing from him. "Tickets? You're wasting money on this junk?" His voice was loud enough to rattle the spoons in the drawer. Behind him by the sink, Sabrina was polishing a wine glass, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each stroke was another log on the fire. She didn't look at me directly. She didn't have to. The little tilt of her head, the tight line of her mouth, that was her way of pouring salt in without lifting a finger. "It's my money," I said softly, though my voice was hardly more than the rustle of the curtains. Leo laughed, a hard, humorless sound that hurt worse than any yell. "Your money? From the cookie jar? That's for groceries, Mom. You don't have an income. We pay for everything. We let you live here for free. Don't you forget that." Free. The word landed like a slap. Never mind the life insurance from Frank's accident that I'd handed over for the down payment on this very house. Never mind the years I worked doubles at the diner so he could have new cleats for Little League. Never mind the nights I sat up with his daughter so Sabrina could post pictures from some rooftop bar. "It's not the $5, he went on, pacing now. "It's the principle. You're 72 acting like a child. Grow up." Sabrina's voice joined in then, syrupy sweet, but with a poison under it. "We just think it's a bit undignified, Clara. People talk." The kitchen, my kitchen, once seemed to tilt. I saw the pencil marks on the doorframe from when Leo was small, the faint scuff on the floor from his first tricycle, and felt something inside me fold in on itself. I wanted to explain about Marco, the clerk at the corner store, how he always said, "The usual Miss Clara?" Like I was someone worth remembering. I wanted to tell them how those tickets weren't about winning. They were about having a little pocket of hope in a life that had grown so small. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. Instead, I reached for the ticket he was holding, the silver still unbroken, and took it gently from his hand. I folded it once, then slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan. "Don't say we didn't warn you," Leo muttered, turning his back. Sabrina followed, her perfume lingering in the air long after they'd gone upstairs. I sat there a long while, the toast going cold on my plate. Outside, the world went on. A lawnmower buzzing down the street, a dog barking somewhere. But in that kitchen, the air was heavy with something that wouldn't lift. 2 of my tickets were gone before the day was out. I found the empty spaces on the table where they'd been, the neat square of dust beneath them like the outline of a body at a crime scene. And that's when I knew. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. After the scene in the kitchen, I moved slower than usual, keeping to the corners of the house like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I made myself useful, folded laundry that wasn't mine, rinsed coffee mugs they'd left in the sink, but mostly I stayed quiet. It was late afternoon when I finally had the kitchen to myself. The sunlight had slipped around to the back of the house, and the air was thick with that dusty stillness you only notice when no one else is around. I reached into the cardigan I draped over a chair and pulled out the ticket Leo had tried to shame me for. The silver panel gleamed under the light. I held it for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. My hands shook, but not from fear. I took a quarter from my purse, Frank's old lucky one, worn smooth on one side, and pressed it to the ticket. The familiar rasp of metal against paper filled the room. The first number revealed itself, 14. My heart began that slow, deliberate beat it gets when something inside knows more than your head does. I kept scratching. 28. 3. 14 again. I stopped. My eyes traced the neat rows, the matching numbers. And then I saw it. Beneath the prize box, a figure so large it almost didn't fit in the space. $22 million. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I just sat there, the quarter still in my hand, while the kettle on the stove began to whistle softly, as if it were the only one in the room who understood the gravity of what I was holding. I turned the ticket over, my mind sharp and steady, and uncapped the pen I keep by the phone. In my neat, shaky handwriting, the same that signed permission slips, insurance forms, and birthday cards for decades, I wrote Clara Mae Thompson across the back. The ink sank into the paper like it had been waiting for me. Then I added the date. There. Mine. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was something deeper. Certainty. For years I'd lived under their roof, tiptoeing around their moods, shrinking myself to fit into the quiet corners they left me. Now I held something they couldn't take away. Something they wouldn't even see coming. And I knew them well enough to know exactly what would happen if they found out. Leo would say it belonged to the household. His polite word for himself and Sabrina. She would smile that tight little smile of hers and tell me it would be simpler if they handled it for me, just to take the stress off. And by the end of the week, I'd be a footnote in the story of their windfall. No, this was mine. And if I wanted to keep it, I'd need to be careful. I made tea and carried it to my room at the far end of the hall, closing the door quietly behind me. From under the bed, I slid out the old cedar chest I'd brought from my apartment when I moved in. It still smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. Inside were photo albums, Frank's service medals, and a little metal coffee tin I hadn't touched in years. It had once held Maxwell House, but now it was where I kept my just-in-case cash, small bills tucked in old birthday cards, a few coins in an envelope marked for laundry. I eased the winning ticket inside between two folded dish towels and placed the tin at the very bottom of the chest. When I closed the lid, I felt the click of resolve settle inside me. That night at dinner, Leo talked about refinancing the house, and Sabrina chattered about a brand collaboration she was trying to land. I smiled and nodded, chewing my chicken slowly, all the while thinking of the ticket resting quietly in the dark. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing. I would not let them touch it. Later in bed, I listened to the hum of the house, the plumbing groaning, the faint murmur of the TV down the hall. I thought of Frank, of how he'd worked his hands raw in the steel mill, only to have most of what he left swallowed by this place and the people in it. Not this time. I fell asleep with a picture in my mind. A small house somewhere near the water, a porch swing, a quiet kitchen where every drawer held only my things. No one's shadow falling across my table unless I wanted it there. The decision had been made. And if there's one thing a woman my age knows how to do, it's keep a secret until the right moment. The day it happened, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and lilacs from the bush by the fence. I was in the garden, knees damp from the soil, planting marigolds in the strip of dirt by the shed. Gardening's always been a way to keep my mind quiet, though that morning my thoughts kept circling back to the coffee tin tucked away in my cedar chest. I didn't hear them come into my room. I didn't hear drawers open or the sound of paper sliding off a surface. I only realized something was wrong when I went inside an hour later and found the hall strangely still. Too still. My bedroom door was open wider than I'd left it. I stepped inside and saw at once what was missing: two of my scratch-offs. The ones I'd left in the church bulletin, still unscratched, now gone. In their place was a faint square of dust on the dresser top. The bulletin itself had been tossed back, carelessly, as if they wanted me to notice. From down the hall came the muffled sound of voices. Leo's low and tense, Sabrina's higher, tight with excitement. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone. I'd heard it when they landed the offer on this house, when Sabrina bragged about getting a big sponsorship deal. It was the sound of people counting money they didn't have yet. I didn't confront them. Instead, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table as if nothing was wrong. I'd been expecting this for years in one form or another. People like Leo and Sabrina think they're clever, but they forget that women my age have had decades of practice watching for the moment a hand moves toward what isn't theirs. It didn't take long for the final blow to fall. Leo came into the kitchen mid-afternoon. His face set in a strange mix of triumph and irritation. "Mom," he said, "Sabrina and I have been talking, and we think it's time you considered other arrangements. You've been here a while and well, we need the space." I sipped my water and looked at him over the rim of the glass. "Other arrangements?" His eyes flickered just for a second, but he pressed on. We'll give you a little time to get things together. Maybe you can stay with Aunt Linda for a bit. We'll set your things out for you. Behind him, Sabrina stood in the doorway, her arms folded, the faintest smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. They moved quickly after that, the way people do when they're eager to finish an unpleasant chore. My suitcase appeared on the porch. A laundry basket with my folded clothes. The floral afghan I'd crocheted last winter draped neatly over the top, as if they were being considerate. I stepped outside, the warm air pressing against my face. There it was, my life reduced to a handful of bags and boxes. The door closed behind me with a firm click, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. It should have hurt more. But instead I felt a curious calm settle in. Because I knew what they didn't. The only ticket worth having was still right where I'd hidden it, tucked inside an old coffee tin in the basement, beneath folded dish towels that smelled faintly of cedar. They thought they'd stolen my win. In truth, all they'd done was rid me of their company. As I stood there, the neighborhood went on around me. A lawnmower humming 2 houses down, a dog barking in the distance. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the sidewalk, my shadow stretching long in the afternoon sun. They watched from the window, I'm sure of it. They'd think I was going to cry, maybe beg. But I didn't. I kept my back straight, my steps even. In my mind, I could already see the next move. Because if they thought tossing me out was the end of the story, they didn't know me at all. I carried my things only a few blocks before my arms began to ache. The late spring air was heavy with the scent of cut grass and car exhaust, and the wheels of my old suitcase rattled over the cracked sidewalk. I didn't have a plan, not yet. Just a vague sense that I needed to keep moving until the house was out of sight. By the time I reached the harbor, the sun was sinking low, painting the water in streaks of orange and pink. The bench near the pier was empty, its wood weathered gray from years of salt and wind. I lowered myself onto it, setting the suitcase at my feet. The quilt Sabrina had so neatly folded now draped over my lap. It was there, with the gulls crying and the boats creaking in their moorings, that the weight of it all began to settle in. I thought of the years I had poured into that house, the long days at the diner after Frank's accident, when my legs ached so bad I had to sit on the bus stop bench before I could even make it inside. The life insurance check I handed to Leo and Sabrina so they could afford that down payment. I'd told myself it was an investment in our family's future. What I didn't know was that it would buy me a corner in their house and a list of rules about how to live in it. I remembered the nights I sat up with their baby girl, forehead pressed to mine as she burned with fever, while they slept through alarms. The afternoons I pushed her stroller through the park so Sabrina could take pictures in a dress she'd never wear twice. And now here I was, the quilt that had once covered my son's bed when he was small folded in my lap like a goodbye gift. The sky darkened, and the harbor lights flickered on one by one. I could hear music from a bar down the street, the clink of glasses, the hum of people with somewhere to be. My somewhere had been locked behind a door with a deadbolt. Still, there was a strange kind of peace in that bench. No one was shouting. No one was telling me I was a burden. The air was cool against my face, and for the first time in a long while, I could hear my own thoughts without someone crowding them. I pulled the quilt tighter around my shoulders and let myself drift through the memories. Frank, coming home from the mill with his lunch pail dented from years of use. Leo as a boy running down the driveway in his little sneakers, his knees always scuffed. The sound of our screen door slamming in the summer. Those were the days when family meant something different. When you built a life together because you wanted to, not because someone was keeping score. But that life had gone piece by piece without my noticing. Maybe I'd been too willing to give. Or maybe they'd just learned too well how to take. Around midnight, the harbor quieted. The boats rocked gently, their ropes creaking. I leaned back, my head against the cool slats of the bench, and let the quilt cushion my shoulders. The bench wasn't comfortable, but it felt more mine than the bed I'd been sleeping in under their roof. I thought about the coffee tin in the basement, the ticket inside signed and dated waiting. The thought warmed me in a way the quilt couldn't. It was like having a lamp lit in the dark, a small steady glow that promised I wasn't finished yet. When the first blush of dawn touched the sky, I stood, my knees stiff, and walked toward the little cafe at the corner. I ordered a coffee and a slice of toast, paid with a 5 from my coin purse, and sat by the window watching the harbor wake up. Fishermen heading out. A young couple walking their dog. No one knew I'd spent the night outside. No one knew what I was carrying. Not the suitcase at my side, and certainly not the secret folded away in that basement coffee tin. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. They thought they'd written me out of my own story, but I knew better. And soon I'd be the one holding the pen. It was close to 2 in the morning when I made my way back toward the house. The streets were quiet, just the hum of a distant street lamp and the occasional rustle of leaves. I'd learned a long time ago that if you move like you belong somewhere, people don't tend to look twice. Leo and Sabrina's place, my place if we were being honest about who had paid for it, sat in its neat little row of identical homes, the porch light off, the windows dark. They'd always been creatures of routine. Leo fell asleep to the 10 o'clock news. Sabrina scrolled her phone until midnight and then turned over with a sigh, pulling the covers tight. By now they'd be deep into the kind of sleep that doesn't stir for anything short of an earthquake. I didn't go to the front door. I knew better. Instead, I slipped down the side yard, my shoes quiet in the damp grass, and crouched near the basement window. The lock on that window had been broken for years, something Leo always said he'd get around to. I eased it open with a slow, steady push, the frame sticking just a little before giving way. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of laundry detergent and the earth under the foundation. My knees complained as I swung through, landing on the concrete floor with a muted thud. The basement was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes stacked high along one wall, the old washer and dryer humming softly in the corner. Against the far shelf sat the cedar chest, its brass latch catching the faint light from the window. I moved quickly, but not so fast that I missed the little details. The jar of nails Frank had kept in case he might need them. The bicycle helmet Leo had outgrown 30 years ago. These were pieces of a life scattered and stored, and somehow all still under the roof that no longer had space for me. I knelt by the chest and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was as I'd packed it. Photo albums, Frank's medals, the folded letters he'd written me during his National Guard training. And there, at the very bottom, was the old Maxwell House coffee tin. The tin was cold in my hands, its metal smooth from decades of use. I pried the lid off slowly, careful not to let it scrape. Inside, folded between 2 dish towels that smelled faintly of cedar and age, was the ticket. My ticket. I didn't take it out right away. For a moment I just looked at it the way you might look at an old friend you've been waiting years to see. My name was still there, neat and steady in blue ink, the date clear as the day I'd written it. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket, the fabric warm from my body. And just like that, the fear I hadn't admitted to myself, the fear that maybe they'd somehow found it, vanished. Before I left, I closed the chest and set the tin back exactly where it had been. I even tucked the dish towels over it again, in case anyone curious came poking around later. Let them think it still sat there, empty of anything important. Climbing back through the window was harder than getting in. My knees protested and my shoulder brushed the frame, but I made it. Outside, the air felt sharper, cooler. I pulled my jacket tighter and started back toward the harbor. As I walked, I passed the front of the house. For just a moment, I glanced up at the window of what had been my room. The curtains were drawn tight. I imagined them sleeping there, dreaming about the fortune they thought they'd stolen, completely unaware that it was already gone. A smile tugged at my lips. Not a wide one, I'm too old for gloating, but the kind of small private smile that says, yes, I know something you don't. By the time I reached the bench at the harbor, the eastern sky was lightening just a bit. I sat down, unzipped my jacket, and rested my hand on the ticket through the fabric. The gulls were starting their morning cries, the water shifting in slow, lazy ripples. I'd done it. I'd gone back and taken what was mine without so much as a creak on the stairs or a whisper in the hall. And now the next move was clear. Morning would come, and with it the trip that would make this official. The sun was barely up when I rose from the bench at the harbor. My back ached from the wooden slats, and my knees reminded me that I was no longer 25, but I'd hardly slept anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that ticket, the way my name looked in blue ink, the tidy curl of the Y in Clara May. I'd been rehearsing this day in my head, ever since the coin first scraped across its silver surface. And now it was here. The Lottery Commission's regional office was in a squat, brick building about 30 minutes away by bus. I knew it well enough. I'd once gone there to claim a $50 win from a holiday scratcher years back. But this time I carried my ticket in an envelope pressed flat inside my purse, my hand resting on it the entire ride. The bus rolled past the familiar Ohio streets, the faded diner with the good meatloaf, the hardware store where Frank used to buy nails by the pound. People were heading to work, coffee in hand, talking about weather and weekend plans. None of them knew there was a woman on that bus with a piece of paper worth $22 million. The commission office was quiet when I arrived, the fluorescent lights just warming up overhead. A young man at the front desk greeted me with a practiced smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I need to claim a prize," I said, my voice steady. "Of course. Over $600? I gave him a small smile of my own. "Quite a bit over." He handed me a claim form, and I sat at a table off to the side to fill it out. Name, address, date of birth, all things I could write in my sleep. When I came to the line asking for the winning ticket's serial number, I carefully copied it from the back, each digit deliberate. The clerk led me to a counter behind glass, where a woman in a navy blazer sat with a small magnifying glass and a scanner. "May I see the ticket?" she asked. I slid it across to her. She turned it over, noting my signature, then ran it under the scanner. A soft beep, a pause, and then a longer tone. She looked up at me with a slight lift of her eyebrows. "Well, Mrs. Thompson, looks like you're our big winner." I just nodded. "So it seems." She asked for my driver's license, copied the number, and compared my signature on the card to the one on the ticket. "Perfect match," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I liked the sound of that, perfect match. No one could say otherwise now. They took me into a small office to finalize the paperwork. The man there explained my options: lump sum or annuity, tax implications, the need for a financial advisor. I listened politely, nodded where appropriate, and signed where he indicated. When the last signature was on the last page, he slid a copy toward me. "As of this morning, Mrs. Thompson, you are the sole official winner of $22 million. Congratulations." Those words settled over me like a warm shawl. Sole official winner. Mine. There was no camera crew, no giant novelty check, just the quiet certainty of ink on paper. But that was enough. When I stepped back out into the lobby, the air felt different. Cleaner, lighter. The envelope in my purse now held my copy of the claim paperwork, and the ticket itself was sealed in an official plastic sleeve. Untouchable. Outside, the sky was a soft gray, the kind that might give way to rain later. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the cool breeze lift the hair at my temples. Across the street, a coffee shop's windows fogged with steam. I went inside, ordered a cinnamon roll and a coffee, and sat by the window. I didn't feel like shouting or dancing. What I felt was free. For the first time in years, no one could tell me what I could or couldn't do. No one could dangle the roof over my head like a favor. I could choose where to go, who to see, how to spend my days. Leo and Sabrina would find out soon enough. They'd scratch those tickets they took from me, find nothing, and then hear about the winner in the news. They'd do the math. They'd remember the missing ticket from my dresser. And by then it would be too late. My name was on it, the date was written, and the commission had the proof locked away. I took a slow bite of the cinnamon roll, letting the icing melt on my tongue. It tasted sweeter than anything I'd eaten in a long time. Somewhere, a younger version of me, the tired waitress counting tips at midnight, the widow signing away her insurance check to give her son a chance, was smiling too. When the coffee was gone, I folded the claim papers back into my purse and caught the bus toward the harbor. Not back to the house. I had no reason to go there now. The bench would do just fine until I decided on my next step. The gulls wheeled overhead as I sat down, the breeze carrying the scent of the water. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought of a place I'd seen in a magazine once. A little house on the lakeshore, with a porch swing and a view of the water that seemed to go on forever. That was the picture I carried in my mind as I opened my eyes again. It wasn't a what-if anymore. It was simply next. It was 3 days after the commission made it official. The news had already trickled through town. Someone local had won the $22 million Buckeye Bonanza jackpot. They hadn't released my name yet. I'd opted for a low-profile claim, just like the man at the office had suggested. But word travels differently in small places. People start guessing, piecing together little bits from the store clerk, the bus driver, the neighbor's cousin. That morning, I decided to walk into town for a few groceries. I had my claim papers tucked safely away in my purse, and the kind of calm you get when you know you're holding a winning hand. The market was halfway busy, retirees comparing melon prices, a mother scolding her toddler near the cereal aisle. I was halfway through picking out tomatoes when I heard a voice I knew too well. Sabrina. She was at the bakery counter, holding a container of ice cookies and speaking in that slightly too loud tone she used when she wanted people to notice her. Leo was beside her, arms crossed, looking sour. They hadn't seen me yet. I could have turned away, taken the long route to the checkout. But something inside me, the part that had sat on a cold bench by the harbor, the part that had climbed through a basement window to take back what was mine, told me to keep walking. I rounded the corner into their aisle. The moment Sabrina's eyes landed on me, I saw it. That flicker of recognition followed by the tight pull of her mouth. Leo turned and his jaw clenched. I didn't say a word. I met their eyes one at a time and let the silence stretch. Around us, shoppers moved on, oblivious. But the air between the three of us had the weight of something unsaid but undeniable. I could almost hear the thoughts running behind their faces. It's her. She still has it. We threw her out and she still won. I didn't hurry. I reached for a loaf of bread from the shelf beside them, checked the date, and placed it gently in my cart. My hands didn't shake. My back stayed straight. Leo's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. I think he was searching for a place to start. An accusation, a plea, maybe even an apology he couldn't bring himself to voice. I gave him nothing. Not a greeting, not a nod. Just a calm, steady look before I pushed my cart past them. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back. It wasn't the gaze of people who thought they still held power. It was the gaze of people who just realized the ground under their feet had shifted, and there was no getting it back. At the checkout, Marco himself was ringing people up, covering for one of his clerks, I suppose. His face lit up when he saw me. "Morning, Miss Clara," he said, like he always had. His voice held no suspicion, just the warmth of a man who'd seen me buy those tickets every week for years. I smiled. "Morning, Marco. Just the usual things today." He bagged my groceries and I slipped out into the sunshine. The air felt lighter somehow. Walking back toward the harbor, I thought about how satisfying it was. Not revenge exactly, but something better. The power wasn't in rubbing their noses in it, or in shouting about what they'd done. The power was in walking past them with my head high, knowing the truth sat firmly in my hands, and they couldn't touch it. Back on my bench by the water, I set the bag down beside me and watched the gulls circle above the pier. A young couple strolled by with ice cream cones, laughing, their heads bent toward each other. Once upon a time, I would have given anything for Leo to look at me like that, with that easy affection you don't have to earn, that isn't measured in groceries or free rent. But some things you stop wishing for when you finally see people for who they are. I'd learned something in the quiet between leaving their house and claiming that ticket. Sometimes you don't need to win the argument. Sometimes it's enough to know you've won the life they thought they could take from you. I pulled the quilt from my bag and draped it over my lap. The air was cooling again, the day slipping toward evening. Out there in their kitchen, I imagined Leo and Sabrina would be sitting in that tense silence that comes after a failed scheme. Both of them too proud to say aloud what they both knew. They'd probably talk themselves into some story about how I'd gotten lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it. It was planning. It was patience. It was knowing when to speak, and when silence could do all the work for you. As the sky deepened over the harbor, I decided I wouldn't avoid them if I saw them again. Let them stew in the knowing. Let them remember the way I'd looked at them today, calm, unbothered, entirely out of their reach. There's a certain kind of victory you can't buy. You have to live it. And that's exactly what I intended to do. It took me nearly 2 weeks after the commission visit to decide. Not about whether I'd leave the harbor bench behind. That was inevitable. But where I'd go. I'd been carrying that picture in my mind. A small house with a wide porch, flowers along the walk, and water close enough that I could smell it in the morning. I didn't want anything grand. After years of making do, I had no taste for sprawling mansions or rooms I'd never walk into. What I wanted was something I could keep warm in winter, something with sunlight in the kitchen, and enough space for a friend or two to visit without feeling like guests in a hotel. One morning I caught the early bus to the lake towns. The ride was quiet, the view opening from city streets to winding roads lined with pines, then glimpses of blue water flashing between the trees. I'd packed a sandwich, an apple, and my folder of bank information, not because I planned to buy that day, but because you never know when the right place will show itself. And it did. The third town along the lake had a small real estate office on Main Street, its windows full of photos tacked to cork boards. Most were cabins with too much siding or houses bigger than I needed, but in the bottom corner was a picture of a white clapboard home with a porch swing and a narrow dock stretching into still water. The caption read, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, lakeshore access. Modest upkeep. Available immediately. I stepped inside. The agent was a cheerful woman with silver hair cut short, the kind who could sell you a house or a pie with the same level of conviction. Looking for a vacation spot? She asked. No, I said. Looking for home. She drove me out that afternoon. The gravel road curved down to a clearing where the little white house stood, its paint just a bit weathered, its porch swing swaying gently in the breeze. A flower bed, wild but still blooming, framed the front steps. Beyond the house, the lake glimmered calm and wide. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. The kitchen had a window over the sink that looked straight out at the water. There was a small living room with a stone fireplace, and 2 bedrooms painted in pale colors that made the light feel soft. I knew within 5 minutes. This was it. We sat at the small kitchen table and went over the details. The price was fair, less than what Leo and Sabrina had spent on a car last year, but I paid in full without blinking. The agent's eyebrows rose, but she didn't comment beyond saying, well, that'll keep the paperwork nice and simple. By evening, the keys were in my hand. That first night I didn't have much. Just the quilt, my suitcase, and a bag of groceries from the town store. I made myself a sandwich and ate it on the porch while the sky turned shades of rose and gold over the water. The air was cool, and the swing creaked softly as I rocked. I thought of the kitchen I'd left behind, the tension in every meal, the way I'd learned to move quietly so I didn't disturb them. This kitchen would hear only my footsteps, my humming as I stirred a pot, the clink of my own teacup. Over the next week I filled the house slowly. A set of china from the antique shop in town, soft yellow curtains for the kitchen, a rug for the living room that felt good under bare feet. I planted marigolds and petunias in the front bed, their colors bright against the white siding. And I baked bread. The smell of it filled the house, warm and yeasty, curling into every corner. One afternoon, I carried 2 loaves to my nearest neighbors, a couple in their 70s who lived in a blue house up the shore. They invited me in for coffee, and before long we were talking like old friends. Word got around that I was the woman who won the big jackpot. Some people asked about it outright. Others just looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. I didn't mind either way. What mattered was that I'd built this life on my own terms. On Sunday mornings I'd sit on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake. Friends from my old bridge group started to visit, and we'd spend long afternoons playing cards at the kitchen table, laughter spilling out the open windows. In the evenings, I'd light a fire in the hearth and read until my eyes grew heavy. Sometimes I'd pause and just listen, to the creak of the house settling, to the gentle lap of water against the dock, and realize that the silence here was entirely different from the silence I'd known before. This silence was mine. One night, as the last light faded, I caught sight of my reflection in the porch window. I looked older, yes, but also lighter, as if the years of bending myself to fit into someone else's idea of my place had finally fallen away. I didn't think of Leo and Sabrina much anymore. When I did, it was with a kind of distant pity. They were still there, in that house heavy with its own air, looking for something they'd never quite find. I had found mine. The lake was calm that morning, so still it looked like a sheet of glass stretching all the way to the horizon. I carried my coffee down to the dock, the steam curling into the cool air. The boards were damp under my slippers, and a heron stood at the far end, watching the water with the patience only birds and old women seem to have. I sat in my favorite chair, a simple wooden one with a cushion I'd sewn from scraps of old curtains, and let the quiet wrap around me. It had been a few months since I'd moved here, and I'd fallen into a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been craving. Mornings on the dock, afternoons tending to the flowers or baking bread, evenings with a book in my lap and the fire crackling in the hearth. Some days I'd take the bus into town, chat with the grocer, or linger over coffee with the friends who'd started making the trip to see me. Other days I stayed put, content with the sound of the lake lapping against the shore and the wind moving through the trees. People sometimes asked if I missed my old life. The answer was simple: no. I didn't miss the heaviness in the kitchen when Leo came home in one of his moods. I didn't miss the way Sabrina's eyes slid over me, measuring, finding me lacking. I didn't miss feeling like a guest in a house I'd helped pay for. What I had now wasn't just a change of address, it was freedom. And once you've tasted that, you can't go back. If I thought about that night, the one when I slipped through the basement window and took back what was mine, it wasn't with guilt. Some might call it stealing, but I knew better. You can't steal what already belongs to you. That ticket had my name on it, in my handwriting with my date. The law agreed, and more importantly, so did my conscience. Sometimes I wondered if Leo and Sabrina still talked about it, if they picked apart every moment leading up to that day, trying to figure out when they'd lost control. I imagined them sitting at that kitchen table, the silence between them growing heavier, each blaming the other. And maybe that was the real prize. Not the money, not even the house by the lake, but the knowledge that I'd stepped out from under their shadow without raising my voice or lowering my head. A boat passed out in the deeper water, its motor a low hum that faded as it moved away. I sipped my coffee and let the sun warm my face. My life was smaller now in the best way. I didn't need much: a roof I owned outright, a few friends whose company I enjoyed, and the knowledge that every choice I made was mine. The lake taught me something too. That you can be still without being stuck, that you can change without rushing. In the afternoons, I sometimes sat on the porch swing and watched the children from up the shore skip stones. They waved when they saw me, their arms swinging wide before letting the rocks fly. I'd wave back, and sometimes I'd think of Leo as a boy, all knees and elbows, hollering for me to watch him ride his bike. That boy was long gone, and I'd stopped wishing for his return. Life moves forward whether you're ready or not. And for the first time in years I was ready. One evening my neighbor Ruth came over with a jar of her homemade blackberry jam. We sat on the porch, spreading it on thick slices of bread I'd baked that morning, and she asked me, very gently, if I ever regretted how things had turned out. I looked out at the lake, its surface catching the last golden light of the day. No, I said. I regret staying as long as I did. I regret thinking they'd change. But leaving? Taking my chance when it came? Not for a second. Ruth smiled, and we sat a while longer without talking, listening to the crickets start their nightly song. That night I stood on the dock under the stars, the water black and deep beneath me. Somewhere across the lake, a single light flickered in a window. I thought of all the twists my life had taken to bring me here. The habit of buying 3 tickets a week, the hesitation that made me leave one unscratched, the quiet certainty the moment I saw those numbers. If I could go back, I'd do it all again. Every step, every risk, every late-night walk back to the house that had shut me out. Because here, with the lake breathing softly at my feet and the scent of bread still lingering in my kitchen, I was finally where I belonged. And there's no regret in that. Not one.